All right. We got all the way through chapter 20 last week, and chapter 20 we talked about this millennial reign of Christ and how he is going to come and rule over the earth for 1,000 years. Now, during that time, or actually prior to that happening, what has happened is Jesus has destroyed those who've come against him. He's uh, kind of put Satan on ice for a while. Ultimately, he's going to allow him to come out again. And the reason that he does that is so that those people who were born into this utopia for the 1,000 years, they've never really had to make a choice to accept God. And so they're going to have that opportunity. Satan is going to be released, and they're going to make a choice between Satan and God. And as amazing as it may seem, there's still going to be a lot of people who will walk away from Christ and choose to follow Satan. And so ultimately, those people are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Now, where we're going to pick up is after this happens, John is going to see another vision. And so we're going to begin in verse 1, where it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth has passed away, and there was no longer any sea." Now, in Isaiah prophesies 700 years before Christ comes on the scene. And if you go later on in the week and look at Isaiah 60 to 65, you're going to see Isaiah is prophesying about this new heaven and new earth and what's going to happen. And in Isaiah 65:17, it says, "See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind." We also see in 2 Peter 3:7, it says, "By the same word, the heavens and the earth that now exist are stored up for fire," meaning they're going to be thrown into the lake of fire, "being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly." And so Isaiah and Peter as well are prophesying about what is going to come. And so we're at that point now. Verse 2 says, "I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eye. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I'm making everything new.' And then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all of this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderous, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all the liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death." And so, again, we talked about the second of death. We talked about the great white throne judgment. That's reserved for people who rejected Christ. They're going to stand before God. Their fate has already been sealed. They're just going to be sentenced and cast away from God. So what we first need to understand is what is the first earth if there's a second earth? The first heaven and the first earth was originally designed by God to be this extraordinary place where he could reside with those who loved him. This goes all the way back to Genesis when you have Adam and Eve and this paradise that was created for them, and they walked with God. But because of their choice to sin, that was all destroyed, and that put us on a path that has taken place over thousands of years. And we're trying to get back to that place where we have that perfect place once again, where we can reside with God. Now, the interesting thing is that now that we're in the millennial reign, or the millennial reign is wrapped up, we know that during the 1,000-year reign, Christ is ruling. We know that things are very, very good. It's sort of this utopia where nature and man kind of live together, where people live much longer. The scripture said if someone died at 100, they'd be considered someone who died young. And so, as great as things seem to be, you have to understand that it is not a world that is without sin while Jesus is reigning. People will still sin. The difference is Satan and his demons won't be influencing us to sin, but we will still make choices that will be wrong. And again, you'll remember that we're previous chapters we saw where the saints who came back with Christ, they're ruling right alongside with Christ during this 1,000-year reign. And so the reason they need to rule and have authority is because there's going to be people who make bad choices, and there's going to be sin that still exists, as minor as it may be relative to the way it is today. Sin is sin in God's eyes. And so this new heaven and earth, Jamie, if you would read 2 Peter 3, verses 11 to 13.
Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness.
All right, thank you, Jamie. So Peter is looking forward. He's saying what is going to happen. There's going to be the destruction of the heaven and the earth, and there's going to be a replacement for that. And he goes on and he says that this new heaven and this new earth is simply where the righteous are going to live. And so those who are righteous are the people who are without sin, or the ones who are following Christ. And so God wants to create this perfect place for his family, which again, he did. We saw early in the Bible in Genesis. He's trying to get back to that place. And so he gave everybody, even those raised in this utopia, gave them the opportunity to choose between God or Satan. And so now that all those who were sinners, all those who accepted or rejected Christ, they're in the lake of fire, there has to be a new place for these righteous people to reside. And that's what the new heaven and the new earth is all about. The problem is there's a debate about whether this is literal or figurative. And so I lean toward it being literal. But there's one piece that one word that kind of gets people's attention. This word new that is used in the scripture in the Greek is a word that is used not as in new as in replacing something, but it's new as in its quality, the freshness. And so there's some debate. Some people think that the world somehow is going to be sanitized and made new. It's going to have a new quality about it. And I suppose that would fit. But you could equally say that there's actually going to be a physically new heaven and earth. And so what is going to happen, I lean towards a physical new replacement of the old earth and the old heaven. And what that means is that there's a period of time, however long it is, between when the old earth and the old heaven is destroyed and the new one comes in, where we're kind of sort of in this suspended animation where, where are we going to be while the transition takes place? I have no clue. I suppose if it was that important, God would make it much clearer. But we know that Jesus holds the whole world together right now. And if he can do that, he certainly can handle this transition. And so some of that is just taken by faith. What's more important, don't get hung up on the figurative or literal heaven and earth. What's more important is what John is trying to convey, and that is that this new dwelling place is going to be the presence of God. He's going to be there in the midst, and all those associated with the sea, as we've said previously, the sea would be Satan and the Antichrist and all those who've rejected Christ. That no longer exists. The sea of evil is gone, and God is residing. Now it says in there that Jesus says it is done, meaning it has come to pass. It is something that has been completed. It has finally arrived. And he's identifying himself as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. This is just literature to identify him as the one in complete authority who is able to make this happen. And then it also says that he is going to provide for the thirsty without cost, meaning every person who's accepted Christ as their Lord and Savior, they're going to be able to reside in this place, and this place is going to provide for them without any cost. The cost has been paid. If you're a part of the family of God, you're entitled to all the blessings that are going to exist within the New Jerusalem. And so now we get to this part of the New Jerusalem. John is going to explain what this new city looks like and what's taking place there. And keep in mind, we talked about Babylon. Babylon was the prostitute, and that was symbolic of Satan and all that's evil in the world. And so now the new city, the New Jerusalem, is sort of in contrast to that. All that was evil in Babylon is now going to be represented in the New Jerusalem with all that's good and pure and of God. And John says that he sees it descending from heaven, and it's adorned as a bride. And so keep in mind the ancient culture of weddings, very elaborate, and the bride was dressed and adorned with all these things that exhibited purity and beauty. And so that's what this new Jerusalem, this new heaven is being presented to the family of God, sort of as a bride, fully adorned and equipped for the people. And so John is taken by an angel, one of the angels that unleashed one of the bowls that we talked about previously. He's taken up on a mountain, and so he can get an overview of this city and what it looks like. And when you get some time, if you want to go to Ezekiel and look at chapters 40 to 48, this is going to be a prophecy with Ezekiel talking about the new heaven and the new earth, what it's going to look like, what it's going to be like. So we don't have time to read those obviously today, but when you get time, go back and look at that and compare the two. And so now we're going to see more specifically how John is going to describe this new location. So who had 21:9 to 27? Was that Jason?
Yes.
Okay. Ready? Go.
And I'll read these specifications.
What?
Is it okay? I'll read this blueprint out. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It showed me the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, real clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were the 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. The city was laid out like a square, as long as it is wide. He measured the city with the rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length, and as wide and high as it is long. The angel measured the wall using cubic measurement, and it was 144 cubits thick. The wall was made of jasper, and the city of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth ruby, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th turquoise, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. The great street of the city was of gold, as pure as transparent glass. I did not see a temple in the city because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is the light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, and there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing impure will enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life.
All right. Yeah. So, again, I don't think you want to get caught up too much in whether the city actually descended from heaven. You can have that position. I told you that's where I lean. But a lot of people look at this as figurative. But I think what's important here and what John is trying to convey is that this is going to be where God resides. Okay, in verse 11 it says, "It shone with the glory of God. Its brilliance was like that of precious jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal." John is helping us to see this extraordinary presence of God, and he's using things that the readers would have understood as the most brilliant, the most beautiful types of things that they would have had access to or that they would have known about. And so he's saying, in his attempt to best describe the glory or the Shekinah glory of God because of his presence, he's using these stones. And so as a result of God being in the center of this, the city has this shining brilliance. In verse 12, it says that it had a great high wall with 12 gates, 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the west, north, south, and west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And so typically in the ancient world, walls were necessary for protection around the city. Not going to be necessary so much for protection. These are symbolic of the greatness of the city, what an extraordinary place it's going to be. And on the towers are angels. And the angels being on the tower are representative of, because they're there because that's where God resides. And so they're kind of overseeing this. So if you remember back in the throne room, you have God in the center sitting on the throne, and surrounding him are those heavenly creatures. You have the 12 tribes and the apostles that are written on the foundation. And so essentially what you have are 12 layers which make up the foundation. Each one's a stone. Each one of those has one of the apostles' names on it. The towers or the gates have the tribes of Israel. And if you'll recall, back when the nation of Israel was in the desert and they would camp around the tabernacle, they would camp in threes. One in the north, one in the east, one in the south, and one in the west. And so that's sort of the way the gates are structured in this New Jerusalem. Ezekiel 48:35 says, "The distance all around will be 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city from that time on will be, the Lord is there." And so that is ultimately the most important thing that John is trying to get us to understand, is that this new place is going to be where the Lord is at. And so if you were someone who looks at this literally, you have to get an idea of how big this place is going to be. And so John is trying to help us here understand that. He says that it's 12,000 stadia. Now, a stadia, depending on your version, is going to be anywhere from 1,400 miles to 1,500 miles. So it's a pretty big space of time. You're talking about the distance from the Canadian border all the way to the Mexican border. So it's a big distance. Now, we have to try and speculate, and that's all it is speculation, how many believers are going to have to reside in this new city. And people certainly smarter than me, the mathematicians, have concluded that perhaps from the beginning of time all the way to the end of the future of time, there will have been 100 billion people who lived. There are about 8 billion people on the planet right now. They just grab a number and they say, okay, let's say that 20% of the 100 billion people who've ever lived became Christians. So you would have 20 billion people who would have to live in the city. That seems like a very difficult task. What we miss, however, is that when you look at this city, you take 1,500 miles, and it's not just square miles, it is cubed. So you got 1,500 miles in every direction, length, width, and height. And those people who are smart enough to figure this out have concluded if there's 20 billion people within 12,000 stadia that is cubed, there's more than enough room for those people to reside. Again, I don't know that it matters a whole lot, but to give you some perspective, when John writes, the size of Jerusalem is 1 square mile. And at that time, there's about 60,000 people that lived in it. So this is an extraordinarily large city that is going to exist for the people of God. Now, he talks about the stones that make up the city. Again, these are symbolic. It's beyond our imagination what the colors are going to be and how extraordinary it's going to be. But these stones are not being used to illustrate wealth and how expensive these things are. We talk about the streets of gold and that sort of thing. That's not what John is trying to convey. What he's trying to convey is that it's going to be this extraordinary place that represents the holiness of God. And what is happening within this, in antiquity, every city in antiquity had at least one temple, one place where whatever it was or whoever it was that they were worshiping, there was a sacred place. Within this city, there is no temple. And the reason for that is because God is at the center of it. There's no need for that temple any longer. And one of the reasons there's no reason or need for a location for sacrifice and that sort of thing is because there's no longer any sin. There's no in the Old Testament, our understanding of the Old Testament, where the priestly system worked, you had the temple and all the accoutrements that came along with it because the priest had to account for the sin that was taking place among God's people. That's all gone now. There's also no need for light. Again, it's going to be hard to imagine, but there won't be a sun the way that we know it now. In Isaiah, again, 700 years before Christ, Isaiah prophesied about this very thing in verses 19 and 20, Spring.
Will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set again, and your moon will wane. Wane?
Wayne?
Lord will be everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end.
All right. So, we have a perspective of the world based upon the cyclical nature of days and nights. And because our bodies, we don't have these glorified bodies that we will have, our bodies are limited. And so we need to have rest. And so we have day and we have night. When the New Jerusalem comes and God is residing in the center of this and we are with him, there won't be day and night. There won't be sun. Our light will come from the presence of God. And because we do have these glorified bodies, there'll be no need to sleep. We won't get tired. We will just exist in and through the glory and the presence of God for all of eternity. And so again, there's no need for the sun. It also says, it gives a reference to kings, and this creates different ideas as well. You have to remember that there are not kings on the earth at this point in the New Jerusalem. The last time that there were kings on the earth was, as a result of the tribulation, and you have the, excuse me, the Battle of Armageddon, where you had armies coming against God. Those have all been wiped away. But what there will be are people who are leading the service that we are doing to God. We'll still have lives, and we'll still have jobs, and we'll do things, and we'll exist and glorify God through not only our worship but through our works. And there will be people who will be leading different groups. The Bible talks about how people are going to be rewarded in heaven based upon the works they do prior to this time. And some people will just have bigger mansions, and some people will have different levels of authority within the kingdom. All of it coming together for one purpose, and that is to glorify God.
So no envious positions.
No envious positions, no. So for me, as we've been going through Revelation, there's a lot of things that are just hard to get your mind around. There's some things that just seem really, really tough. And there's some things that are just beyond comprehension, trying to get our minds wrapped around what it's going to be like to live in heaven. And I don't think that there's any way really we're going to know for sure. We can't get close. And ultimately, that's not important, or it wasn't important enough for God for us to know that, or he would have made it much clearer in the scriptures. What he does make very clear is that, and what is important, is that there is going to be this place. And we are going to reside in eternity with him. And that is our choice. And so suffice it to say, this is going to be an extraordinary place. And the goal is not for us to know all the ins and outs that are going to take place. The goal is for us to make sure that we're there, and to make sure our friends and family and even our enemies know about this place, and that it is very real, and that the alternative to this place is that lake of fire. And again, keep in mind, we mentioned this before, I believe, when you get thrown into the lake of fire, you are not annihilated. There are people who teach and people who believe that the worst case scenario is God casts you into the lake of fire and you're vaporized and you just cease to exist. That's not the case. That's not the truth. Not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that your soul will live in eternity. It's a matter of where. If you live in the lake of fire, you will be undergoing that torture and torment and separation from God forever. And that is a scary thing, and it's a hard thing to get your mind around. But God, if we're honest, has done everything within his power to give us the opportunity to avoid that. And for those that do, we will live in this extraordinary place. with these extraordinary perks that we cannot begin to even understand.